Lewis Hamilton is making his return to Mercedes. Want to know the real reason behind his comeback? Curious about the salary he'll be earning? Interested in finding out what triggered the anger of Frederic Vasseur and Charles Leclerc when the news broke? Stay tuned until the end. This is the video you've been waiting for. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. When the announcement hit, it didn't just ripple through Formula One. It detonated like an explosion that could be heard in every garage, every media center, every corporate suite tied to the sport. The return of Lewis Hamilton to Mercedes was not the type of news that people digest calmly over morning coffee. It was the kind of revelation that made journalists abandon half-written stories, forced rival team principals into urgent calls with their boards, and lit social media into a frenzy where disbelief, elation, and fury all collided in real time. Hamilton wasn't merely changing teams. He was reigniting one of the most dominant alliances the sport has ever witnessed, one that had defined an era and left an indelible mark on the record books. This was the reunion no one thought would happen. Not this soon, not under these circumstances. And its shock value was amplified by the turbulent path that had led him there. The road back to Brackley began long before the public saw any signs. Inside Ferrari, what had started as a glamorous partnership between the most iconic team in the sport and one of its most decorated champions had slowly begun to sour. Outwardly, the atmosphere remained cordial. Cameras captured smiles, and press releases spoke of progress and unity. But behind those closed doors in Maranello, Hamilton's patience was being eroded by a culture that demanded instant results without granting the breathing room necessary to adapt to an entirely different technical philosophy. The SF25 was a car that required years of intimate understanding to master, something Charles Leclerc had cultivated through countless hours of development feedback, simulator work, and race weekends deeply ingrained in Ferrari's engineering rhythm. Yet Hamilton was expected to match, even outpace him, from day one. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. The real cracks widened during a run of races where Leclerc's podium appearances became routine, while Hamilton found himself embroiled in the chaos of midfield scraps, often battling against setups that never fully clicked. In the aftermath of the Spanish Grand Prix, the private exchange that marked a turning point took place. Inside the motorhome, away from the cameras, Frederic Vasseur's tone was calm but icy, his gaze fixed as he told Hamilton, "It cannot be that Charles is on the podium and you are outside the points." The sentence was short, but its weight was enormous. It carried not just disappointment but a clear implication. In Ferrari's internal narrative, his performances were being judged through the prism of comparison to Leclerc alone. From that point forward, Hamilton's internal compass began to point away from Maranello. He continued to show professionalism in public, fulfilling every interview, praising the team's efforts, and deflecting questions about tension. Yet those who worked closest to him saw a different man, quieter in engineering briefings, less willing to engage in broad team debates, and more withdrawn from the informal camaraderie that binds a crew together over a long season. In private conversations with his closest confidants, he began to express frustration not just with the results, but with a growing sense that his voice inside Ferrari carried less weight than it once had. Meanwhile, at Mercedes, the possibility of a reunion was never fully extinguished. Toto Wolff, a figure who has mastered the delicate balance between business pragmatism and personal loyalty, had kept subtle contact with Hamilton even after their initial split. Early interactions were little more than polite nods and light-hearted exchanges in paddock corridors. But as the Ferrari situation worsened, those interactions evolved into longer, more strategic conversations, ones that touched on technical direction, leadership culture, and the long-term vision for returning Mercedes to the top. Wolff made no grand promises, but he didn't need to. The subtext was clear. The door was not only open, it was ready to be walked through when the time felt right. The negotiations, when they began in earnest, were conducted like a covert operation. Face-to-face meetings took place in locations chosen specifically for their privacy, secluded hotel lounges, secure conference rooms far from the race weekend chaos, even in the back rooms of corporate sponsor facilities where no one would think to look. Documents were exchanged only through encrypted channels, and the number of individuals aware of the talks was kept so small that even some key figures within Mercedes didn't know until the ink was nearly dry. Every discussion was layered with caution, each clause carefully examined, not only to protect Hamilton's interests but to ensure the transition could be executed without triggering unnecessary turbulence before the official announcement. When the deal was finalized and the timing set, Mercedes and Hamilton choreographed the reveal for maximum impact. The statement was released at a moment calculated to dominate the news cycle, with visuals and phrasing that evoked both nostalgia and ambition. Within minutes, reactions poured in from every corner of the sport. Ferrari supporters felt blindsided, their emotions swinging between anger at his departure and fear over what it signaled about the team's internal stability. Mercedes loyalists celebrated the move as a return to the glory days, an injection of leadership and raw talent they believed could tip the balance back in their favor. Rival teams, meanwhile, scrambled to reassess their competitive forecasts, knowing that Hamilton in silver and black once again meant a potential re-emergence of the ruthlessly efficient force they had spent years trying to dethrone. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. For Hamilton, the decision went beyond engineering data or contract terms. It was about reclaiming a sense of agency, about placing himself back into an ecosystem where his feedback wasn't just heard but acted upon with precision. Mercedes represented a platform where trust had already been built, where his previous achievements weren't just respected but used as a foundation for future success. He knew the challenges, returning to a team in transition, facing the pressure of recreating a dominance the sport hasn't seen in years, stepping back into the intense internal and external scrutiny that comes with the Silver Arrows brand. But he also saw the opportunity to write a final chapter that wasn't defined by frustration or compromise, but by a calculated strike back at the top. As the dust settled on the announcement, the questions multiplying in every paddock discussion hinted at the scope of what was to come. Could Hamilton and Mercedes rediscover their championship-winning rhythm in a grid now dominated by Red Bull's technological edge? Would Ferrari recover quickly from losing a driver of his stature, or would the loss expose deeper vulnerabilities in their internal structure? How would this reshape the driver market, with ripple effects that could alter lineups for seasons to come? The answers were unknowable in that moment, but the stakes were unmistakable. The sport was about to enter a phase charged with tension, ambition, and the kind of drama that ensures Formula One's narrative will be anything but predictable. Hamilton had spent years mastering machinery that seemed to read his intentions before he even made them real, but the SF25 was nothing like that. Every session with the Ferrari felt like stepping into a sparring ring with an opponent that changed its tactics mid-fight, refusing to be understood. The braking zones arrived too early for his instincts, demanding restraint where his muscle memory urged attack. Steering inputs had to be impossibly gentle, as though the car would punish him for daring to be too assertive. Applying power was its own form of torture, not the confident squeeze he'd used at Mercedes, but a delicate threading of throttle, each millimeter of pedal travel holding the possibility of either traction or ruin. Its aero behavior was another enemy entirely. Some laps, the car felt composed, glued to the surface with a reassuring stability that coaxed him into pushing harder. Then, with no warning, it would change, the rear dancing away, grip falling off like sand slipping through his hands. Pushing only seemed to provoke it, as if the car bristled at the very idea of being driven on the edge. Even in moments when he found speed, the belief that he could lean on it without consequence never truly arrived. The hybrid deployment gnawed at him as much as the balance. In qualifying, the power unit delivered sudden bursts that shifted the car's weight at the worst moments, throwing his braking markers into uncertainty. In the race, it could vanish when he needed it most, leaving him defenseless against an approaching rival. Nothing about the delivery matched the smooth, calculated rhythm of the Mercedes systems he had spent years mastering. Instead, it demanded that he constantly second-guess himself mid-lap. Monaco had been the perfect storm of all these frustrations. The narrow streets punished any instability, and the SF25 gave him nothing but. Turn-in felt hesitant, the front refusing to bite, and when it finally did, the rear would threaten to step out without mercy. Lap after lap, he threaded between walls with the uneasy knowledge that the car could betray him at any moment. When the checkered flag fell, the result felt hollow, a reminder of how far from mastery he still was. That evening, with the harbor lights flickering through the windows and most of the team already gone, Hamilton sat in Ferrari's hospitality lounge. The room was quiet, lit by the warm glow of low lamps, the faint clatter of cutlery in the distance as staff cleared the last tables. Across from him, Leclerc leaned back in his chair, calm, his phone resting loosely in one hand. Hamilton shifted forward, his elbows on the table, voice stripped of the controlled polish he used for the press. "Charles," he said quietly, "how do you make this car work for you? I'm wrestling it from start to finish. The front won't hold, the rear bites without warning. It's nothing like what I've driven before. I can't get the timing right, and the aero feels like it's rewriting the rules mid-lap." Leclerc's eyes met his, a faint smile curling at the edge of his mouth. Not mockery, but an acknowledgement that he understood exactly what Hamilton meant. "I've grown up with cars like this," he replied evenly. You've spent so long in one team that its way of doing things is second nature to you. Mercedes built cars around a certain philosophy, and that shaped every instinct you have. Ferrari's different. The way it builds downforce, how the tires hit their sweet spot, how it reacts to the smallest steering movements, it's its own animal. You can't treat it like a Mercedes. Hamilton shook his head slowly, leaning back. Time's the one thing I feel like I don't have here. Every race, it's the same scrutiny, the same whispers about whether I can adapt. I'm not you, Charles, and I can't drive it your way. You shouldn't, Leclerc said softly, his tone carrying the calm certainty of someone who'd fought this battle before. You have your own style. But even the best have to bend sometimes. You've been playing the same melody for years. Now you've been handed a new instrument. At first, every note feels wrong. It's like learning to write with your weaker hand. Frustrating, awkward, unnatural. But with enough patience, it becomes part of you. The car isn't asking you to be me. It's asking you to discover a version of yourself you haven't needed before. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of a refrigerator and the distant echo of a yacht horn from the harbor. Hamilton's gaze drifted toward the window, where lights shimmered on the water, his jaw tightening as if weighing the truth in Leclerc's words against the pressure that followed him every weekend. There was no easy acceptance in his expression, but there was the faint spark of something else. Not surrender, but resolve. Even after the public displays of unity, Hamilton's mind was drifting further from Maranello with every passing race. The months in red had stripped away the initial thrill, replacing it with a gnawing frustration that no podium could fully mask. The constant comparisons to Leclerc had stopped feeling like analysis and begun to sound like accusations. The political layers of Ferrari, subtle, strategic, and suffocating, seemed to seep into every interaction. Meetings weren't just about performance, they were about positioning, influence, and whose voice carried the most weight. Hamilton, a 7-time champion, found himself treated less like the cornerstone of a project and more like a variable in a political equation. He could feel it in the way conversations shifted when he entered a room, in the measured looks exchanged between engineers, in the faintly polite but distant tone of team briefings. The Hungarian Grand Prix was the day it crystallized. The race itself had been another uphill slog, wrestling a car that never fully came alive beneath him, watching Leclerc extract fractions of pace he couldn't seem to summon. When the checkered flag fell, Hamilton crossed the line knowing what awaited him. The debrief wasn't hostile in words, but the undertone was unmistakable. There were phrases about expectations and long-term plans, but behind them lay the suggestion that his role in those plans was shrinking. Smiles were stretched thin, voices just a shade too neutral. To an outsider, it might have sounded like a standard post-race review. To Hamilton, it was a warning. That night, the hotel room felt too quiet, the air too still. He sat on the edge of the bed, helmet bag still by the door, replaying the moments that had led him here. There was no single incident, just the accumulation of glances, comments, and silences that told him this chapter was nearing its end. He unlocked his phone and found the number without thinking. The call connected instantly. Lewis, Toto Wolff's voice came warm, direct, as though no time had passed since their last late-night conversation. Hamilton didn't ease into it. His voice was low, but there was a rawness to it, stripped of the usual media-trained precision. Toto, I can't do this anymore. It's not just the machinery. It's the way they speak to me, the way the atmosphere changes when I walk in. It's like I'm already on trial every weekend. I need somewhere I can breathe. Somewhere I can walk into the garage and feel like the walls aren't closing in. There wasn't a pause on the other end. Lewis, you know there's always a place here for you, Wolff said, his tone both reassuring and sharp with intent. But if we take this step, it's total commitment. No half measures, no looking over your shoulder. We build this around you again from zero, the way we did when we started. You bring the fire, we'll bring everything else. The hours that followed blurred into a tapestry of memory and planning. They spoke of the battles they'd fought together, the nights they'd left circuits with trophies in hand, the weekends where strategy gambles had turned disaster into victory. Wolff detailed what was already in motion, a 2026 Mercedes project shaped by the sweeping new regulations, a design philosophy that could suit Hamilton's aggressive but precise style. He described the engineering breakthroughs in the pipeline, the simulations running day and night, the fresh talent joining their technical ranks. And crucially, he spoke about the role Hamilton could play from the very first design meetings, not just as a driver, but as an architect of the car's DNA. For Hamilton, it was more than an offer, it was an invitation to reclaim control. To return to an environment where his feedback didn't just matter, it was the cornerstone of development. The idea of walking back into a Mercedes garage, feeling the quiet but unshakable trust of a team that knew him inside out, stirred something in him he thought Ferrari had extinguished. They discussed how to keep the talks under wraps, how to time the announcement so as not to detonate his remaining races in red, how to manage the inevitable media storm. By the time the conversation ended, the first light of dawn was creeping through the curtains. Hamilton stayed seated, phone still in his hand, staring into the pale glow. For the first time in months, he wasn't replaying mistakes or defending himself in imaginary arguments. Instead, he was picturing something new, a return not to the past, but to the feeling that had defined it: trust, freedom, and the belief that when he spoke, the whole room listened. And in that early morning stillness, before any contract was signed, before the rumors could even begin to circulate, Hamilton knew he had already stepped out of Ferrari in his mind. The rest was only a matter of timing. The pace of the discussions was relentless, yet they unfolded in near total darkness, invisible to the wider paddock and hidden even from many within the teams themselves. Only an extremely select group knew the full scope, a handful of top-tier decision-makers inside Mercedes, Hamilton's most loyal confidants, and the lawyers tasked with ensuring every legal thread was tied so tightly that nothing could unravel. Meetings were deliberately staged far from any Grand Prix venue, often in locations where no one would suspect Formula One business was being conducted. Conversations were carried out on secure lines, documents were viewed in person but never left behind, and code names were used to disguise who was being discussed. In Italy, the response from Ferrari was immediate and ferocious. Senior management, blindsided by how rapidly events were escalating, assembled emergency committees to find a way to shut the door on Hamilton's departure. Their legal department combed through the fine print of his contract, searching for clauses that could be leveraged to block the move or delay it long enough to change his mind. Proposals were drafted for revised terms, a higher base salary, richer performance bonuses, and an increased role in shaping the technical direction of the car. Some even floated the idea of restructuring the entire driver program to revolve around him again. But beneath the surface, they all sensed the reality. The emotional bridge between Hamilton and Ferrari had collapsed. The relationship was no longer strained, it was broken beyond repair. Hamilton's thinking was clear. He wasn't merely walking away from a project that had stalled, he was heading back to the environment where he had built his legend. Mercedes was more than a workplace to him, it was where he had forged a dynasty, a place where his voice carried weight and his instincts were trusted. Though the team had faced challenges in recent seasons, he knew its culture, its people, and its capacity to evolve. He also understood that stepping back into the Silver Arrows wasn't about nostalgia. It was about aligning himself with a structure capable of producing a championship-caliber car again, especially with the next major regulation shift looming. Once the deal was sealed, the unveiling was treated like a high-stakes theatrical production. Mercedes' communications team, operating with military precision, rolled out a campaign designed to dominate headlines and ignite every corner of the fan base. The announcement video was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. It opened with a deep, resonant hum of an engine building in intensity, layered over archival radio calls of Hamilton's past victories with the team. Black and white footage of him lifting trophies and celebrating with the crew dissolved into quick, almost subliminal flashes of a new silver car silhouette. Then came the defining moment: Hamilton, shot in dramatic lighting, walking slowly down the Mercedes garage corridor. His stride was deliberate, the helmet cradled against his side. He stopped in front of the car bay, turned slightly toward the camera, and locked eyes with the viewer. One word appeared on screen in metallic letters: home. Fade to black. The impact was instant and global. Within minutes, #Hamilton returns, #back to Mercedes, and #Silver Arrows rise were trending on every major social media platform. Fans erupted in disbelief, joy, and speculation all at once. Reaction videos appeared almost immediately. Some viewers sat in stunned silence before erupting into cheers, others broke down crying, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of the announcement. TikTok was flooded with slow-motion breakdowns of the video, with creators pointing out the tiniest details: the stitching on his overalls, the reflection in the visor, the subtle tweaks to the silver livery. On Twitter, memes flew back and forth at lightning speed, while Instagram filled with fan art imagining Hamilton's first win back in silver. The shockwaves reached far beyond the fans. Current drivers posted cryptic messages: ranging from celebratory to teasingly competitive. Former champions weighed in with their own takes, some praising his courage, others warning about the challenges ahead. Team bosses across the grid fielded questions they weren't ready to answer, careful to maintain diplomatic neutrality while privately recalculating their strategies for the upcoming season. Sponsors recognized the marketing goldmine immediately, with some pushing to fast-track new campaigns featuring Hamilton's return before the next race weekend. Merchandise demand surged to such extremes that Mercedes' online store temporarily went offline from the traffic spike. Limited edition caps and shirts featuring his number alongside the iconic three-pointed star sold out in hours. Ticket sales for certain Grands Prix skyrocketed, particularly at circuits where Hamilton's past victories with Mercedes had become part of the track's folklore. Sports broadcasters reshuffled their season coverage plans to build entire segments around his comeback, knowing the story would be a ratings magnet. Hamilton, watching the frenzy from the privacy of his own space, remained outwardly calm but inwardly charged with renewed purpose. He knew that the noise, the hashtags, and the celebrations were just the opening act. The real work, learning the car, rebuilding on-track chemistry with the team, proving himself against the next generation of contenders, was yet to come. But as the reaction echoed around the world, he could feel the shift. The move wasn't just a personal decision, it had already become the defining narrative of the season, one that could reshape the competitive order and add an entirely new chapter to his legacy. In the paddock, an almost tangible charge pulsed through the air, as if every conversation, every sideways glance, and every hushed exchange was part of a single all-consuming story. The announcement of Hamilton's return to Mercedes hadn't just made headlines, it had detonated through the sport's bloodstream. Seasoned mechanics in other garages paused mid-task to glance at screens streaming the news, PR teams scrambled to adjust their narratives, and drivers found themselves fielding a flood of questions about something they had no control over but couldn't stop thinking about. Charles Leclerc, though visibly affected, chose his words with a mix of restraint and sincerity when speaking to a confidant away from cameras. He admitted that, sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones you make with your heart, a remark that, while brief, spoke volumes about the weight of personal conviction over professional convenience. Max Verstappen, navigating an overwhelming swarm of reporters after practice, didn't offer a lecture or a prediction, just a small knowing grin and a calm, "It's going to be interesting," before walking away. That understatement only amplified speculation, suggesting he already knew just how much this new dynamic could disrupt the balance at the top. Lando Norris, ever quick to inject humor into the sport's political theater, bypassed the press entirely with a single tweet, "Guess we'll be seeing more black overalls again." The comment exploded online, sparking meme storms, fan theories, and cheeky replies from other drivers. For Hamilton, this was not a return driven by nostalgia, it was a deliberate, calculated act of self-definition. Coming back to Mercedes wasn't about rekindling a memory, it was about forging a new legacy from a position of battle-hardened experience. His years at Ferrari had left their mark, etched into him through high points of sheer brilliance and low points of frustration where political interference and technical stagnation tested his patience to the limit. Those years had sharpened his instincts, hardened his resolve, and made him more certain than ever that the best of his racing was still ahead of him. Mercedes had transformed as well. The Brackley headquarters had become a sprawling, hyper-efficient hive of development, with advancements in simulation technology, aerodynamics, and data analytics pushing the envelope further than ever before. The moment the news broke internally, the atmosphere shifted from quiet determination to electric urgency. Engineers who had shared championship triumphs with Hamilton exchanged grins that hinted at unfinished business. New recruits, who until then had only studied his telemetry as part of training modules, suddenly realized they would be collaborating with him directly, an honor that was both exhilarating and daunting. The fan response was unlike anything the sport had seen in years. Social media became a tidal wave of reactions, tribute videos, meticulously edited compilations of his past Mercedes victories, and bold predictions about what the partnership could achieve this time. But this wasn't the rose-tinted nostalgia of fans looking backward. It was the restless anticipation of a global audience demanding something bigger, faster, more ruthless than before. The expectation wasn't to replicate past glory, it was to exceed it. Behind closed doors, preparations began immediately. The team fine-tuned the cockpit to Hamilton's exacting standards, down to the millimeter in pedal spacing and the gram in steering resistance. Simulations were queued up months in advance, covering every possible weather pattern and track condition. Strategists began revising race scenarios, considering how Hamilton's unmatched ability to adapt mid-race could be weaponized under the new tire allocation rules and sprint weekend formats. The wind tunnel schedule was reorganized to prioritize feedback from his upcoming simulator sessions, ensuring his influence would shape the car's DNA before a single wheel turned in anger. Rival teams were not blind to the shift. Within hours of the announcement, private briefings were called in motorhomes across the paddock. Technical directors discussed whether to accelerate certain upgrades, while marketing chiefs debated how to protect their drivers from the psychological impact of facing Hamilton in a resurgent Mercedes. Sponsors from outside the Mercedes ecosystem began making inquiries, sensing a commercial gold rush tied to the story that was dominating global headlines. Hamilton moved through the chaos with the calm of someone who had been here before, but the intensity of someone who knew this was different. His public statements were measured but laced with a competitive undercurrent that hinted at deeper ambitions. He avoided talking about comebacks, framing his move instead as a forward leap into uncharted territory. Every interview, every offhand remark seemed designed to send a message. He wasn't here to relive a golden era, he was here to redefine what dominance looked like in the modern Formula One age. As the season opener loomed, the Mercedes garage became a place of near-military precision. Every member of the crew, from the pit wall to the tire technicians, carried themselves with a sharpened focus. The Silver Arrows livery gleamed under the garage lights, tools were organized with meticulous care, and quiet conversations behind closed doors revolved around strategies that could stun the competition before the year's first checkered flag fell. Formula One thrives on rivalries, narratives, and seismic moments that change the course of history. This was all three wrapped into one. A legendary driver returning to a team that had once ruled the sport, both determined to prove they could do it again, only bigger, sharper, and without mercy. And as the anticipation built to a fever pitch, it became clear this wasn't just another storyline for the season. This was the one that would dominate every headline, every fan debate, and every whisper in the paddock until the final race. And perhaps long after.